Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Today, we will be starting a lecture on motivation, which, as you recall, in the last segmentation lecture that we had, I had suggested that we will be taken on the psychological factors, and one of them is motivation. But before we start motivation and discuss the psychological factors that influence behavior as well as become part of one of the segmentation forms, we would like to recapitulate what we discussed in the beginning in the segmentation section. If you recall, we had talked about the importance of segmentation within the context of the segmentation, targeting, and positioning frame for developing marketing strategies. We had emphasized the importance of it, and further, then we discussed a number of factors which can be used for segmentation purposes. For example, we discussed geographical segmentation procedures. We talked about the demographics. We talked about psychographic factors, which includes lifestyles and attitudes and other behaviors. Then we also discussed a few points regarding how the customers use products, which is usage-based or user-based segmentation frames. Briefly, then, we had completed this whole thing. However, we had left a little portion of it, which before I go into the motivation frame, I would talk about how do we use these, in what forms, particularly broad strategy development frames. Plus, when we are going to select targets, because like I said, first we have the segmentation, then we choose the target. So to be able to choose a target, we need to know what are the characteristics of a good segment which can be then chosen for a target. Now, the important point in targeting is that, number one, we should be very clear to be able to identify the particular characteristic of the segment which will be used for the purposes of marketing or positioning strategy. For example, we know that it is very simple to be able to develop a characteristics like demographics. We know male, female, student, businessmen, age groups, whatever. It's very easy to understand. Same is the case with geographical segmentations. But the problem basically comes in when you are looking at psychographics, the values and the attitudes and the lifestyles. That characteristics are more difficult to identify. But one of the things that is important in targeting is that whichever target you choose, you should have a characteristic which can be identified and used for the purposes of positioning strategy. The second factor is that the segment or the target that you will choose out of all the segments should be sufficient in terms of number of people. Which basically means that we should be able to identify a large demand in that area, because we must remember that marketing is, the bottom line of marketing is to make profit. So if you are going to target a segment which does not provide enough demand, then that segment should be avoided. The point is that the segment should be sufficient in terms of the demand that is created so that it is profitable for the company to be able to launch into that. The third factor is that it should be reachable, in the sense that if, for example, I cannot reach that segment through promotion, through my logistics, then that segment would not be a very suitable segment. A good example is that there may be demand, for example, in a location like Deer for a product that you have. But if we do not know how to promote the product to that market, then it becomes a little difficult to accept that kind of a segmentation procedure. The final one that we are interested in is that the segment, the characteristics within the segment should be very stable. That particularly means that the segment should not change rapidly in terms of the needs or in terms of the demographics and so on and so forth. So the segment that you choose should be sufficiently stable over a long period of time. For example, we know that the teen market, the teenage market, where the teenage groups are there, their behavior obviously is similar, and these behaviors stay similar for a long period of time, and the teenage group also extends over a number of years. So that kind of a segment then becomes more rational to target. So having looked at these 4 points, number one was, as we had suggested, that it can be identified. Number two, we had discussed that it should be sufficient in terms of the demand. Third, we talked about it should be reachable. And finally, we had discussed that it should be stable over a period of time. Having suggested what kind of targets you can select, now let's look at the kind of strategies we can have in terms of segmentation. There are 3 types of strategies that we are looking at. Number one is concentration strategy. The second one is the differentiation strategy. And the third is counter segmentation strategy. So we'll go over one by one, and let's look at certain frames on how these strategies are rational when we develop them for the firm. In terms of concentration, now this suggests that we select only one segment to target. We have one product, we have a price for it, we have promotional campaign, and we have a placement strategy, all targeted and customized for this one segment. Normally, small companies tend to start with one segment strategy. We have understood and we have discussed quite extensively that segmentation breaks the market into homogeneous groups, which are homogeneous within, but they are heterogeneous, yani they are different from each other. And therefore, there could be different needs, and the way we can approach them are going to be different. Now, the company which is small with less resources would obviously like to target one segment so that they can sufficiently provide this kind of need that the market has and satisfy that need thoroughly. However, on the other side, there is a segmentation strategy which is called differentiation strategy. In this situation, the company or the firm tries to target more than one segment at the same time, simultaneously. Now, we must understand that when companies try to reach a strategy, they have to see 2 things. Number one, the market or the external conditions, which is the environmental conditions, which comes from the customers, and then it is the internal systems of the company, how strong the company is. And logically, if the company is fairly strong financially, has enough capability in developing innovative products or different products to satisfy different needs, they have the ability to market into different segments, then logic says that they will move into a differentiated strategy area. Examples are like P&G, Lever Brothers, all FMCG companies, the large multinationals, normally target into different segments at the same time. For example, in the shampoo area, if we take the example, we can find a shampoo for long, shiny hair. We can find a shampoo for dandruff. We can find a shampoo which is quickly to be used. So therefore, we have wash and go, and so on and so forth. But if there is a company which is not internally very strong in terms of having certain specific capabilities, then what we find is that they would tend to go for one segment, and once they have secured themselves in that segment and over a period of time have developed capabilities, then most likely that they will switch to a new segment of the same market and then proceed from segment to segment. These are the 2 major strategies that come out of the company's strengths as well as the environmental factors which relate to the customers. The third, which is to my suggestion or opinion, is counterintuitive. What means कि वो जो logic है उसके उल्टा चलता है. वो क्या कि where we are talking about segmenting the market, there is a possibility that over a period of time, the different frames or different requirements of the segment may slowly converge. That means कि उनमें जो मुख्तलिफ चीज़ें थीं वो आहिस्ता आहिस्ता ख़त्म होना शुरू हो जाती हैं और तकरीबन needs become similar over the segments, what we call generic needs. So what we have is that over a period of time ये जो independent और different needs थी वो ख़त्म होनी शुरू हो जाती हैं और फिर we reach a point where same type of need is operating throughout the market, and at that point what is required is that we tend to combine the segments, which goes against the process of breaking the market. We now start combining the segments because each segment becomes so small that it becomes unfeasible to meet those needs. Typically, you can see that in universities, particularly in the Western world, large universities, where initially they offer different kind of programs. For example, in the area of advertising and promotion, they might have had 4 or 5 programs offered, for example, advertising, publicity, personal selling, sales promotion, and so on and so forth. But then, over a period of time, the number of people in each class becomes so small that it becomes irrational to try and offer the courses or the 4 courses separately. So what they do is they try and combine the whole course and may call it promotion, where all these separate ingredients are put together, and we have a new course which is maybe called a promotion and which covers all these areas, satisfying generically the need of the area of advertising, sales promotion, what do you call it, personal selling, and so on and so forth. As we were discussing the area of how strategies would be developed, we had mentioned and I had suggested that internal strength of the company becomes critical when we try and find whether we should go for a single segment strategy or a differentiated strategy. And I said that in these two conditions, the issue is not only the consumer, but also the firm, the organization's own characteristics. The third one, which is related to counter segmentation, was purely based on the market condition and the requirements of the market. Now, before we move into the motivational frame, I would like to give you a brief on the internal factors which are critical in terms of developing strategies. This is what we call the concept of the resource-based view, which means basically researchers have suggested that most of the strategies can be developed on 2 frames. One frame is to look at the external market and then develop your own strategy. The second frame is that you look at the company's strengths and see which strength can be leveraged. Leverage means which can be used in terms of creating satisfying propositions and putting those propositions in the market. And propositions we have already discussed a little before include the promotion, the product, the kind of price would there be, what kind of promotion will take place, and the placement situation. Now, obviously, when we are looking at these strategies, we need to look at whether we are capable in trying to provide that kind of product which is required by each segment. Here is where the resource-based view comes into position. It's a new concept. It suggests, which has been articulated now in a very well-defined manner, and it suggests that companies have strengths. They have their own internal strengths which differ from other companies, and it is these strengths and the way they are applied in the market that creates the differentiation. And we were discussing just now the differentiation strategy, which means going into more than one market. Obviously, to be able to go into more than one market, we should be financially strong. For example, we should have the capability to produce different products for different market segments. We should be able to reach these markets through different channels of distribution. And obviously, to be able to reach these channels of distributions, we need to have very strong marketing capability sitting in the company. Given all these, we need to be able to look at the frame of strategy which will be coming out of consumer behavior is when we look at the need of the market, then we must look inside the company and see how can we satisfy this need? Are we capable of satisfying this need? Naturally, it is going to be in relation to the competitors, because competitors are also going to be operating within the same market and they will be operating in the same segments. Now, when we try and challenge the competitor, we should know whether we have unique strengths which are better placed to be able to provide better satisfying, better value adding products to the market. I hope that this frame, which covers the strategy area, is now clear. Now we go into the basic concept that what we discussed. That would be the lecture for today's session, which includes motivation. Now, before I go into motivation, let's little bit recapitulation of the concept of need. We have been discussing it, but now we need to go a little more detailed in terms of need. From the very beginning of this consumer behavior course, we had suggested that needs are the critical point on which organizations need to focus, and the research and the logic suggests that if a company is more understandable of the need in the market, or they can understand the needs of the market in a better manner than from the competitors, they will be able to provide better products, better propositions to satisfy that need. Now, more into this detail is that what the logic suggests, therefore, that companies tend to write their mission statements or their objectives not in terms of the products they produce, but in terms of the needs. Therefore, what is basically a need? It is the internal factor which motivates or pushes a person or influences a person to behave in a particular manner. Now, we are therefore going to make sure that we understand the link between the two concepts, and therefore, when we talk, we will talk of need and motivation in the same frame. We have already discussed that companies therefore tend to understand what is the need that motivates a person to behave in a particular manner, and what is the need that they would try and satisfy so that the person becomes satisfied and the person has achieved a particular goal. Now, this concept of trying to understand the need is basically, or the frame that is important in this area of understanding needs is, the question is market orientation. That is what we call this behavior of firms who try and understand the consumers in a better manner. Market orientation, therefore, is the logic behind firms being more capable of satisfying a need than its competitor, and therefore we tend to say that a firm which is more market oriented is in a better position to be able to satisfy the customer's need. Behind that, there are a number of frames for market orientation. We need to understand the customer, we need to understand the competitor, we then have to make sure that we can come to a conclusion and then bring the product to the market in terms of need satisfying propositions. Now, so we know that companies have to learn to be more market oriented, because finally it is the need that is going to be satisfied. Having said that, now let's just look at the definition of the motivation, and you can see this definition on the screen. The definition is, motivation is the reason for behavior, as well as a motivation or a motive is a construct representing an unobservable inner force within individuals which stimulates a desire and compels a response, providing specific direction to action. Now, look at it very carefully. We have talked about it, that motivation is a construct, and construct means it is combination of a number of things, and it is unobservable. That means we cannot see it. However, there is this force inside the person who pushes the person to start behaving in a particular manner or give direction to the action of the individual. And since we are talking about in terms of marketing, we suggest that it is that force which drives the person to buy, to use a product, and obviously the goal of that action is satisfaction. Now, we have talked about needs, we have talked about motivation. Now we need to just touch something as the end of this motivating behavior. When we say there is a need, then there is a motivation to behave in a certain manner, and obviously once you have behaved in a certain manner, the goal of this behavior is satisfaction of that need. The need should be satisfied. Now, to illustrate this whole procedure of how these things take place, we look at the figure on the screen. And if you watch the figure, it shows clearly that in the beginning there are unfulfilled needs, which means there is a kind of a gap between what a person would want and what, or a person's state which he would like to have, and the state he is currently in. Now, the state what he wants to have and the difference between the state that he currently is, the gap is the need that he wants to satisfy. Now, once the need has been identified, there would be a strong tension. That means एक किस्म की तशना frame uske andar hoga. There will be a pull to be able to try and take the current status that he is in to the ideal status that he wants to be in. So this creates a kind of a tension. Now this tension takes us into the drive, and the drive is, which is the force which is going to push us into the direction of an action that we need to take. Now if you watch again on the screen, there are two factors which influence this desire or the drive towards the behavior. Between the two, we see that there is the learning process, which is on the top, and at the lower end we find the cognitive process. Now try and understand these two words. Cognitive is recognition of something. You know, we recognize number of products that can satisfy our need. Obviously that has an impact on the way we will finally behave. For example, if we find that we have a need for toothpaste, then obviously cognitive need would be to be able to recognize that there are a number of options available in terms of different products. The second force that is applied in this area is what we call the learning. Now, learning can come from different sources. It can come from somebody else telling us, it can come from our personal experiences, whatever, but these two, when they combine, takes us into the direction of behavior. And obviously that behavior is the choice that we will make in terms of buying or using that kind of product. And the end of this, as you see on the screen, is the goal. The goal, once you have achieved that goal, reduces the tension that had been created, and you can see the link between the goal and tension, which is tension is released. Now, let's go back a little to these frames and try and understand what it is. But before we go into it, we should also be able to recognize that most marketers tend to use the word need and want simultaneously or synonymously. That means they consider them the same. However, we should be able to recognize one thing which is very important, and that is that needs exist within us. They cannot be created. However, needs can be converted into wants, and that is what the marketers tend to do. For example, hunger is a need. It's there. We cannot create hunger, but it's part of our biological system, and therefore we do have the need to eat. However, whether we want to go and buy McDonald's or we want to go and buy charga to feed ourselves, this is when wants comes into position. Therefore, when the marketers try and promote their products, they actually are trying to convert the need into a want, and therefore what we can basically say to ourselves, need is internal and it is consumer oriented, whereas want becomes product oriented. It becomes product specific. So when I say I need to clean my mouth, Obviously, there is a choice. I can use refresheners, I can use mouthwash, I can use toothpaste, or I can use even a simple stick to clean my mouth. But when the marketers try and promote the products and we become influenced by their products, we then make a choice, and this choice is what we call the product-specific want. Marketers, therefore, tend to differentiate between, or researchers tend to differentiate between two needs. The first need is what we, like I mentioned, innate needs. That is biogenic. Biogenic means biologically oriented. For example, food, water to drink, sleep. All of these are innate needs which are inherent in the person and cannot be created. They are part of us, and therefore they are also known as biogenic. Now, the second type of need is the acquired needs, which, like I said, they are product specific. They are what we might call psychogenic, which means we have learned certain things about the world, and then we need to, and we have found certain ways to satisfy such needs, and therefore we try and become product specific when we are trying to satisfy them. So please try and understand here two things, that when we are discussing these needs, wants, goals, there will be certain things which will be overlapping between them, but they are in their own ways a little independent of each other. So when we discuss, we might be using similar terminologies, but we should be able to be very clear that needs are different than wants, and when you satisfy the wants, then there is something we call the goal, which is actually the end of our want satisfying behavior. So, but the things stay the same. They roam around in the same framework. So in the need area, we have two types. What we are generally in research, we suggest that. Number one is the innate biogenic, and the second one is psychogenic, which we suggest are acquired needs or which we learn from our environment. Now, a quick look at goals. Now, goals are basically the end of your want or need satisfying behavior. Now, again, we can have different kind of goals. The goal which could be generic, and generic goals are when you want to satisfy the broader frame like hunger. When you satisfy your need of hunger, you eat. The generic goal that you have acquired is that you have now, you feel satisfied, you have no more hunger. But on the other side, like we had the similar kind of a need, we have a goal which is basically what we say a product-specific goal. And a good example is that you want to do law or you want to do your MBA. This is the generic goal that you have now. What is the product-specific goal? You want to join virtual university or you want to go to Harvard University. Now they become product-specific goals. So the marketers need to understand which is the generic goal that is being targeted and what is the product-specific goals that a consumer has, so that the marketer can provide a product which will satisfy the product-specific or whatever the want which has been created for a particular product can be provided to the customer. Now, we need to also understand that research suggests that there are a number of types of goals. One of these are when you are, the two types that has been suggested. One group is promotion and prevention, and the second group is ideals and ought. Now, let's try and understand the difference, because research suggests that there are two types. Now, in case of promotional goals, that means that we are interested in growth, personal growth. So we target personal growth factors. And prevention is when we try and avoid a particular aspect. For example, we might be hungry, therefore we would like to go to a specific restaurant to fulfill that need. This would be what we call, in terms of the promotional goal that we have, that is satisfy our growth factor. On the other side, we might have a desire to avoid a particular situation. For example, we have a transportation need, we need to be transported, We avoid a motorcycle because an internal need that we have is security and safety. So we want to avoid a motorcycle because we feel that motorcycle is not a safe drive. Now, these are two aspects that researchers have been able to identify in terms of goals. A second group of goals is what we call the ideals and the oughts. Now, the ideals are what everybody aspires to have. It's something that you deserve or desire in the final analysis. And they are particularly related to very broad, intangible frames that we want to reach in terms of our desires. However, oughts are where you are part of responsibility. You have a responsibility to do a particular thing. That means you have to do it. That is the way things are. Now, in responsibility, we can talk about a family. The mother might like to buy a particular kind of breakfast cereal because that's her responsibility to take care of the child's health. On the other side, in the case of an ideal, could be that I would like to go and study in one of the best institutions in the world, Ivy League college. Now, whether I reach that or not, but my goal is there. Similar, the responsibility goal that is of a mother or a father to provide the child to a good schooling may have a different approach to the whole thing. So we find that goals could be different, the ideal frames as well as the ought frames. Now, having understood the concept of goals so that we can see the chart that we had, we moved from the needs, and we have obviously the, the tension coming in and the desire, and then obviously we have behavior and goal satisfaction. The point that we were trying to link up is all of these three: need, goal, and motivation. Now, we come to the concept of motivation and we try and understand again. Motivation, again, like we said, is a construct which is composed of various frames, various approaches to it. Research suggests that there are typically two major motivations that we have. One we call the positive motivation, the other we call the negative motivation. The positive motivation is when we have desires, positive desires. We have needs and wants which are more positively oriented. On the other side, we have what we call the negative frames, and we suggest that these negative frames could be like fear, like we have just discussed a little bit before, security, safety. Now, these motivations are groups that we can figure out, and we do understand that when we are scared of something, we will obviously, the goal would be to try and avoid going into that particular aspect of particular area. Whereas all the positive frames in which we have the needs and the wants and the desires which are positive, we will tend to use the goals of promotion. So there is a definite link between these two aspects. Now, motivation, therefore, is also seen from another angle, and that angle is rational and emotional motivations. Rational motivation is the outcome of economics, where we believe that all behaviors that consumer demonstrate have rational, logical reasons behind it. And it is assumed in economics that all decisions taken are rationally oriented. However, we understand as marketers that people not only tend to sometimes apply rationalities, but in many areas, our decisions are motivational in terms of emotionally motivated. We tend to be, motivated through emotional frames to try to act in a particular manner. For example, rationally, we might want a watch to tell time. But when we are trying to choose the product, that could be based on emotional factors. For example, if my father had a watch, I may just go and buy that same watch because of my association with my father. That is more emotionally oriented than if I was to buy a watch which will give me time and will be cheap. Now, that is why we find watches can range in terms of price from, let's say, 1,000, 2,000 rupees to 200,000, 300,000 rupees. Now, the logic behind all this is that even though the need is to tell time, and the rational decision would be to buy a watch which will be cheap and provide us the same need satisfying or goal satisfying factor, but we tend to spend money based on certain emotional frameworks that are operating behind our psyche. Now, in the question of psychology, therefore, we are more concerned with the emotional factors that we have. Having discussed this, now let's look at the concept of these needs and these frames. Now, obviously, we need to understand that needs are never fully satisfied. Now, if you look at the screen, we have seen that there are about 6 factors in it. Number 1, needs are never fully satisfied. 2, needs change. 3rd, success and failure influence needs. 4th, we can have substitute goals. There is frustration. Maybe the end of not being able to satisfy a particular need could lead us to frustration and may take us into a decision or an action which, like we said, may be emotional rather than rational. Finally, our needs could be basically defense mechanisms operating in our system. Therefore, we tend again to behave in an emotional manner based on certain defense mechanisms that are behind our behavior. Now, obviously, we understand the first 3, which are more important, and they logically are that we should understand that needs are we can never fully satisfy it, because if we had been able to satisfy the needs, there will be no marketing requirement. That will finish off anyway. Second, needs change over a period of time. And here you must remember the difference between biogenic needs that we talked about and the psychogenic needs. Now, what we are talking about here in terms of is the psychogenic, which means the biogenic needs cannot change. They are there. You have fear, you have hunger, you have desire for water, you have thirst. They will stay. But the psychogenic needs, the reasons, or what we have also termed as the wants, can change. And they do change over a period of time. Finally, we should know that success or failure in terms of our goals that we had and the way that we behaved in a particular manner can establish how we will behave and how we will satisfy that particular need. Now, given this discussion, the most significant framework to understand needs, which has been researched and is the most popular for the marketers and for the management people, is what we call the Maslow's need hierarchy. Now, this model I will explain in a little detail, because it is these which are also used, and let me remind you again, used both for the purposes of segmenting the markets as well as for developing products and need-satisfying propositions. So we need to understand this in a major detail. If you look at the chart, we will find that there are 5 types of needs. At the bottom end, at the lowest level, is what we call the physiological needs. And we have already mentioned them in terms of the biogenic needs. These are the needs for hunger, need for thirst, need for air, and so on and so forth. The second the second step is the safety and security need. Then the third step is the social needs, which are needs which are related to other people. The fourth need is the ego or the esteem need. And now this is, again, personalized, internalized systems. And the final is the self-actualization. Now, Maslow, who had studied anthropology, which means they study human behavior, and he tried to understand how people behave over a period of time from one point to the other, and why do they behave in a different manner. So having studied the civilization or the way people or human beings developed over a period of time, he was able to discover or determine that certain needs operate at certain times. For example, if we go back into history of human beings, at the very beginning, people were only concerned by eating, by sleeping, by the air they used to breathe, and by the water they wanted to drink, because that was the basic, most important need. And at that point of time, they were not concerned about how to dress, how to live in kind of houses, and so on and so forth. So the first need, which becomes critical, is the physiological needs. You need to satisfy that particular need before you can start thinking of anything. A good example could be, and try and understand this example that I'm giving. We know that sometimes people tend to behave in certain manners, and maybe a very honest person might be driven to steal something because he wants to feed himself and he's hungry. Now watch, the reason or the motive behind his stealing something is hunger. And that becomes the first thing. He doesn't think about anything else. So the first logic is to satisfy that hunger need. And then the second need is safety. And if we look again back towards the human development, we see the anthropologists suggest to us that once the hunger, the thirst, and the sleep need was satisfied, people tended to go into caves, started dressing, wearing clothes, maybe made of animal skin, and so on and so forth, because now the second need was operating, and that need was safety and security. So they located themselves in caves, they discovered fire, and then they tried to make sure that they use these to protect themselves against wild animals or against the elements of the nature. Elements are like storm, snow, rain, sun. So they needed to protect themselves from these things. So they went into caves, they built houses. Once they had built houses, logic suggests then they started meeting each other, because now their first need of hunger satisfied, second need of safety satisfied, now they are into the third phase, and it is at this stage that families got together. So tribes came to be together. People started collecting together, and that was basically the social need that was operating. So people tended to come together to satisfy the social need, which is interaction between people. And it is at this stage that language started developing and people started communicating to each other. Once the social need in terms of getting together was satisfied, problems started coming up. Now one person thought he was better than the other one. And this is when you have satisfied the area of interaction and relationships, now you start feeling, I'm better than this person is better than this person. So we find that people tend to become chiefs of tribes. Fights started so that they could establish their level in terms of esteem and ego. So egos came into position. And only came into position because social need was satisfied. So when the ego need comes into position, it is basically one person trying to be better than the other. And we have certain examples in when we try and compete, it is based on our ego system. So we are trying to prove that we are better than the other person. However, according to Maslow, the social need has been satisfied and we have moved into the higher level need. Finally, Maslow suggests that there is a point where people do things not because they want to impress somebody else or do it for another person. They do it because they have a strong internal drive to achieve something. Self-actualization, therefore, is considered to be the highest level of need, which motivates people, where people tend to act for their own personal, internally related factors. A good example is a lady who might like to climb Himalaya mountain when she is 60 years old, and question would be, why would she do it? The reason is that she wants to satisfy her need to achieve something, not to show people or the world that she has been able to do it, because then the logic will change. Now, therefore, she will try and do it for her own self. And exactly in the same situation, the first person who climbed the Mount Everest most probably did it because he wanted to do it for himself. And at that point of time, in the early 1900s, obviously there was no too much of information that could travel fast. So he most probably did it because he had this internal urge to be able to achieve things. And we find that most of the time, this kind of a need is driven or drive the artists, the people who are more into creativity. And sometimes there is a logic link between creativity and the issue of self-actualization. Now, having understood all these factors, let me also explain the logic that Maslow has identified. In his scheme, each need has to be satisfied before you move into the next need. That means unless the first need is satisfied, you cannot go into the second one. Second aspect is that if the lower need is becoming dissatisfied or something has happened at the lower end, then you will tend to move from the higher level to the lower need level. An example is, we find that this is common in Pakistan also. For example, people have a lot of money, they put it in the bank, they throw parties, everything is going good, social need is being satisfied, and suddenly there is this financial crisis in the market. Financial crisis, people become scared. So what do? They try and take the money out of the banks and keep it safe and avoid spending the money which they were doing initially, maybe for ego-satisfying needs or maybe for social needs, parties going on, dinners taking place. But now, because suddenly safety and security is being targeted, so the people have shifted away from a behavior which was basically targeted into ego need to move back to secure themselves. Same is the case with factors which may threaten a life. If a life is threatened and a person is already operating at the ego need level, he will tend to move and try and protect himself and come to a lower need. The only criticism that you can identify here is that according to Maslow, there were steps, a hierarchy. That means first need has to be satisfied before we move to the second one, then we go to the third one. But the practical life suggests that people can move from one need area to a very high level need area without satisfying any need in between. Now, obviously, there are certain examples, and we find that there are certain people who may not have a drive for social factors, who may not be even bothered about safety and security, might just go straight into self-actualization need. Most of the religious people are that kind. Buddha is a very good example. He left his kingdom, went straight into the jungles. He was not concerned about his security or safety. He was operating at the self-actualization stage, where he sat in a jungle for a number of years. Now, therefore, the criticism is basically about Maslow that needs may not be stepwise. People could switch from basic level need to go to the ego need immediately, or may go into self-actualization. So there is no sequential movement from one need to the other. Okay, now, since we have discussed the basic concept of Maslow's need hierarchy, let me give you an assignment. If you have pen and pencils ready, could you just take this assignment and try and solve it and see whether you can identify the need that is operating behind the behaviors of these people. Also try and watch that behavior is something that we tend to do. For example, a person wants to, let's say, has a need that he wants to write. Now, he can use a pencil, he can use a pen, he can use a computer to do the job, but then the behavior must come out of a certain reason that he has in his mind. And the reason, we need to understand what is going on, and that is very important when we discuss in marketing. Now, let's take these 4 cases, and I'll dictate these cases to you. Let's say there is a person who has, the behavior is that these 4 people have asked their company or applied to their company to borrow 50,000 rupees. Now, the first factor is that they have put in an application to borrow 50,000 rupees. Behavior kya hua? Behavior is the writing of this application. Now, the first person, he has written in his application that he wants the 50,000 rupees because he wants to pay the fees for his son who is going to a good school. So the first person wants to borrow this money so he can pay for his son's fees where the son is going to a very good school. Now the logic is, we want to find out why or what is the motive that is operating behind in terms of the need which has made him behave in terms of borrowing money. So the second man, let's say, is a person who has asked for this money because he has said that in his application that he wants to go on a safari to Africa. Now again, the behavior is the same. That is the important point. The behavior is the same. Each one of them is borrowing money. But for each one, there is a different reason, and that is what we want to look at. We want to find out what is the reason or the need that is operating behind. Now, let's say the third person. The third person has applied. He's joined the company new, and he wants to borrow the money because he wants to buy clothes for his office work. Maybe a new young person who has just finished his studies, has joined the company has a dress code, and he wants to now borrow money so that he can buy his clothes and have a same status that everybody else has. The fourth person, is the person who has actually borrowed the money, and in his application he writes that he has borrowed or he wants this money because he wants to throw a party on his sister's wedding. Now again, watch, the rationale of behavior is the same, but each one of them has a different reason or logic operating behind him, and that is what we were trying to understand. Because if we make a mistake in understanding the reason or the logic behind, it is possible that we may be trying to provide a product or a service which may not actually meet the need that he has. Now therefore, in your assignment, you try and find out for each person what is the need or motivation that is operating behind this behavior of asking for money. Okay, now this assignment we will discuss in the next lecture, and this more or less brings us to the end of our session. We can recapitulate before we leave, and we know that we started with the concept of needs and goals. We try to understand what is motivation, and finally we discussed in detail Maslow's need hierarchy along with the criticism that we have about it. In the next session, we will try and, number one, try and see what the assignment suggests and find answers to it, and then we will also try and see how these Maslow's need hierarchy can be applied in terms of segmentation and in terms of positioning strategies, as we have discussed that all segmentation and all rationale behind understanding consumers is to be able to position the product finally in the market. With this, we come to the end of the lecture. Thank you very much.